Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Ableton Music Producer Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Giffen. Before we get started with today's podcast episode with Cliff Goldmacher, it's going to be really awesome. He's going to talk to us about being a producer, working with clients, and a lot of other great things. Before we get started, I'm going to do something new on the podcast. I think one of the greatest things an artist could do is to share the love of other artists. So, for a while, I'm going to share a new artist song for about, say, 30 to 40 seconds as a segment at the beginning of new episodes, and just to kind of feature artists I'm listening to and that I love that I know uses Ableton. So this is the Ableton Music Producer Podcast, and we need to spread the love. If you have a track that you would like to have shared on the podcast, or maybe one of your homies or a friend you know has an amazing song and you want it to be heard on the podcast, tag them in it or tag yourself in it and send a direct message to the Instagram account at Live Producers Online. Tag the person in it or yourself with a link to the track, and you might have it featured on this podcast. I'm going to do a little shameless self-promotion. If you didn't know, I have my own music project called Philia, Philia, and my band I just started putting together is releasing a new track called Wiggles, which is dedicated to my former dog Wiggles. But yeah, let's check it out. This is Wiggles. It'll be released in a few weeks. Really hope you guys enjoy it, and then we will go to today's interview with Cliff Goldmacher. Hey, I hope you guys enjoyed the new track. Thanks for listening. Would love to connect with you on Instagram. You can follow me and my band at Philia Music on Instagram or Facebook. Just type in Philia Music. We are not the hardcore Filipino band that is also named Philia. Just look for the blue triangle. I would love to connect with you. I'm actually going to be doing an upcoming webinar on liveproducersonline.com/webinars. If you go there, I'm actually going to show you guys how I made that track for Wiggles, which is going to be released in a few weeks. Also, if you want help on your own projects, liveproducersonline.com. If you join the pro membership plan, I'll help you a few times a month. You can submit your projects to me. I'll give you feedback on the mixing, the production, whatever, to help you reach your goals producing music. That's enough about that. I'm stoked to have Cliff Goldmacher on the podcast today. He's going to give a lot of great insights to us. Let's get started. For those of you who don't know who Cliff is, he is a songwriter, music producer, and educator. He's played and produced thousands of recordings and album projects for major and independent publishers and labels. He's also taught lots of workshops for music rights organizations like BMI, ASCAP, and actually presented about songwriting for TEDx. It's pretty cool. And he's going to be sharing a lot of great insights with us about producing music from the producer's perspective and working with clients today in a lot of different angles. So without further ado, thanks, Cliff, for hanging out with us today, man. I'm stoked to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Dan. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I recently saw your article published by BMI, which I think most of our listeners are probably familiar with, have already heard of them. But I subscribed to that blog, and I thought you had a really great article that was talking about the do's and don'ts of working with music producers. And so I hit you up a few weeks ago, and I was like, hey, let's have you on the podcast. Had some really great insights.
Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Before we dive into a lot of the other things that we're going to talk about today, I want to just learn more about you for our listeners and kind of hear about how you got started with your music career and how did that lead you to where you're at today?
So My path wasn't the typical path. I went to college, was a political science major, had already gone as far as to take the law school entrance exam, the LSAT.
Oh, nice.
Thought that's where I was headed. And I took a year off between college and what I thought would ultimately be applying to law school. But I had a job teaching English in the south of France, which was a great way to spend a year. The job was almost no hours. I think I worked 8 hours a week. And so I got a gig. I'd been playing music in college and before. So I was interested in music. And I had even dabbled in some recording just with some, back in the day, this was a little Tascam Portastudio where it took a cassette tape and split it out into several tracks. And I was always interested in that stuff, but it was more just something I did on the side for fun. But in that year that I was overseas, since I basically didn't have a job, I found a gig in a little French cafe, and I worked there 6 nights a week performing, and I started writing more songs. I had just written a couple of songs right at the end of college, again, for no reason other than I was sort of moved to do it. And at the end of that year, I thought, wow, I really like this. I really like playing music. I really like writing songs. My feeling was if I go to law school now, I probably won't come back to music. But if I try music for a while and it doesn't work out, something tells me law school will be there still.
Yeah.
And so I started down that road, and I worked for a year in what I refer to as my playing Brown-Eyed Girl for drunk people phase, where I just played cover songs in bars in Northern California, out near where I had gone to college, and started writing more and recorded my first CD.
Okay.
And then when I realized I was serious about music and serious about pursuing this, especially the songwriting side of things, I realized that living in the Bay Area, which is a lovely place to live, is not a music city and not a place where I was really going to improve my craft. Mm-hmm. So I moved to Nashville, and this was in the early 90s. And this is where the production side of it starts to really come into play. I had always recorded for myself. That was just something that I did. So when I'd write a song, I would do a small recording just to sort of explore the song. And then I always liked overdubbing, and I play a couple of instruments. So it was an opportunity to just explore arrangement ideas.
Sure.
But as I surrounded myself with more and more songwriters, soon friends were asking me to record their songs. And the more that I did this sort of thing, just because you do something a lot, you tend to get more comfortable with it and better at it. Right. So about 5 years into my time in Nashville, and all of those first 5 years, and I think this is important for anybody who is thinking about moving to a music city, I had a day job. There's no way not to when you surround yourself with that much musical talent. No matter who you are, you're going to need a way to make ends meet. Sure. And it's not going to be playing live music, because in a town like Nashville or New York or LA for that matter, everybody's playing live music.
So competitive. Yeah.
And there's just not a lot of money to be made that way, but there is a lot to learn. And so as I was supporting myself working at a music magazine, I was also improving my recording chops and my songwriting chops. And about 5 years in is when I got to the point where people who I really respected and admired were asking me to produce some of their stuff. Mm-hmm. And that's when I realized I sort of had a gift for this outside of just doing my own work, and that people were willing to pay for it. So it was a very gradual process and realization of the fact that I had this thing that I could do, and that people were actually interested in having me do it for them as well.
Yeah. No, actually, I have kind of a similar story. I can relate to that in a lot of ways. It's working that day job and then just working on your craft at night, and just keep grinding and learning and absorbing as much information as you can from people that are doing it in the industry or YouTube or wherever your interest lies. So yeah, no, totally. And then it seems like it really worked out for you, because go ahead and share with us, like, what are you doing right now? I know you have a website, you're training people, you're teaching, you're doing songwriting. You got a lot of cool things going on.
It's a mixture generally for me. I figured out over the length of my career that if I focus on any one thing entirely, then I'm subject to the sort of vagaries of the ebbs and flows of the business. So if I were only writing songs, there are times where I'd be incredibly busy and my songs are getting recorded by artists, but there'd be other times when nothing is happening. And the same with the studio. If it was only the studio, there are times where the studio is so busy, it seems like the work's never going to end. Mm-hmm. And then there are times where the phone just won't ring. So I just never know what's coming. So the way that I've learned to balance that over a career is I work on songwriting, I work on the studio, and I also teach workshops and do those things. And they all sort of weave together so that if I'm lucky, not all of them are at a low point at the same time. So there's always something I can be doing that's keeping me busy and interested. So Yeah, I write with artists for their records. It could be anything from jazz to country to blues. I'm more on the organic side of things. I tend to write on either piano or guitar, and with artists who are also generally singers and players of instruments. But then on the production side, I bring in a lot of session musicians. My Nashville studio is pretty much set up for live tracking, drums, bass, guitars, that kind of thing, vocals.
Yeah.
And then on the teaching side of things, it's everything from beginning songwriters. I host a co-writing workshop here in Sonoma every Labor Day weekend where I bring in people who've never met, pair them up, and get them to write songs together.
That's awesome.
Which is really fun.
Yeah, yeah.
And I also teach executive teams to work on their projects, whatever they're working on in the business world, and use songwriting as a way to help them explore their creativity and communication. So I'm a little bit all over the place these days.
Yeah. No, and it works for you. So like having those multiple streams of income and working in different projects and things are great. Today for the podcast, I kind of want to pick your brain and narrow it down to the producer's perspective. So a lot of the people listening to this podcast are bedroom producers or people who are working those day jobs and just doing the daily grind, right? You know, and maybe they're Starbucks baristas, but like they're really good at their craft and producing at home for their own projects. But I know that there's a lot of people listening to this podcast as well that are wanting to maybe work with more clients. And that's kind of where I want to focus in on today. And I know you have a lot of experience with that. Like I mentioned, your article on BMI, the do's and don'ts of working with music producers, I kind of wanted to reverse engineer that article from the producer's perspective and kind of talk about what it looks like working with the clients and kind of narrow down. And I know that when you were starting out, you said, you know, you started working with clients and bringing them in. And say I was somebody new and I know how to produce, I know how to track record. I have my own basic studio set up at home. Where are some places that I could find some maybe new clients to work with?
Well, so one of the things to think about, just to take a half a step back before I answer that question, if you are serious about making a living in music, I am a big believer, especially early on in your career, in surrounding yourself with like-minded people doing similar things. It is the single best way to learn. It was absolutely formative for me. So start by thinking about moving to a major music city. Now, if songwriting specifically is your thing, it feels like Nashville is that place. Nashville is not just country music, but if you know, all kinds of other styles of music are also things that you, especially your listeners, it sounds like are more into the Ableton Live kind of electronica vibe. That feels to me like a New York or an LA thing. And I'm not saying you need to live there forever. And it may be that a lot of your listeners can't actually make it work to live there. But at the very least, you need to be visiting those places, and you need to be visiting them often, because in the end, the thing that has sustained me almost from the beginning of my career up until now, 25 years later, is my network. And that network started out as the same people who moved to town with me when we were all brand new and didn't know anything about what we were doing. Now all the way up to people who are super established in their careers, and who send me referrals. And it's all, I mean, with very few exceptions, it's the network. So, and networking has sort of a negative connotation. And I don't want it to sound like what I'm saying is I'm staying up late and going to bars and telling people I think they're great and they should come and record with me. That's not what this is.
Spending hours on LinkedIn. It's like
no, it's really not that. It's meeting like-minded people who you really get along with. And getting to know each other as human beings get to know each other, not as someone who you think can do something for you at some point. That's a generally an unhealthy recipe. So meet people as people. And I'll give you a classic example. I worked as a staff songwriter in Nashville. I had a publishing deal. The way that I got that publishing deal is not by staying out in bars and meeting publishers. It was a week after I moved to Nashville, when I didn't know anything about anything, I went and joined the Nashville Songwriters Association. And the guy who was working the front desk, who had also just moved to Nashville, we just hit it off. So he's in an administrative assistant job. I've written 10 songs. 5 years later, he's running a publishing company. I've written hundreds of songs. He signed me to my deal. So we grew together. And that is a much more accurate depiction of how you get a publishing deal than you go to town, you're great, and some publisher you meet at a bar says, I've got to sign you. That's not reality.
It's true. Yeah.
All the more reason that if you're serious about your craft, you need to get to a place where there are people that you can meet in a natural, organic way who in time, and none of this happens quickly. It certainly doesn't happen as quickly as we'd like it.
Yeah.
So get to the place where you're going to meet these people and build those relationships naturally, and it will happen. And as I said, if you can't live there, if that doesn't work for your lifestyle, at the very least, go to these towns a couple of times a year, go to music conferences, make an effort to connect with people, like-minded people doing what it is you're doing.
Yeah.
So
I love
that's answer.
No, that's a great answer. That was really good. And I love what you said at the end with the conferences. That's something I started doing more recently, is going to like the DIY musician conference that's happening in Austin pretty soon, in like a month or two. You know, things like that. Definitely where you're going to start to cultivate those communities and those small circles of people. And it is about relationships in the end, you know?
Always.
Yes. I mean, relationships don't usually start with you just walking up and shoving a business card in somebody's face. Like it could, but yeah, I mean, it's what do you bring to the relationship, not just what are you taking from it. So I love that. That's really good. So are there any online communities that you have found to be helpful in your career at all? I'm just curious for those that can't just move or maybe can't travel for whatever reason.
It's a good question, because I'm not really in a lot of online communities for my production work. I don't have a particularly good answer there. As far as songwriters are concerned, the National Songwriters Association is one of those organizations that works online as well as in person. There are chapters all over the country, but they also have an online presence. They have conferences. Taxi.com, although it is a business that helps songwriters match up with opportunities for their songs, they have an annual conference in Los Angeles. That's another sort of organization online. But as far as online meeting places for producers, unfortunately, that's not something I'm super familiar with. I'd be faking it if I tried to make something.
No, and that's fine. I totally respect that. Okay, cool. Let's kind of jump in the process of talking about what does it look like to actually work with a client. Okay, so you have a lot of experience in this. And sometime when I first started out, when the first client I ever worked with and brought into my home studio, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just literally making it up and pretended like I knew I was doing along the way. And somehow it just kind of worked out and I just kind of figured it out on my own. But as far as working with a client, say I have somebody who is a songwriter and they're like, I have these ideas. I've recorded them on my phone with my acoustic guitar and I just sang into the phone. It sounds like complete crap. I need somebody to kind of help me cast this vision for a song. For you, what do you do with them as far as bringing them into your home studio? What does that process look like when they come to you with that kind of vision?
Well, there's lots to think about here, and I am proud to say I no longer have a home studio. But I understand your point.
Sure,
So let's talk a little bit about what a producer's role is. By definition, I like to describe a producer to a music project as like a director to a film, meaning you are looking at everything from the nitty gritty, the hiring of actors, meaning the actual nitty gritty of the creation of the product, all the way to the big picture. Like, what is the message? What is the vision here? What is the overall thing that you are trying to communicate? So to your point, I do have clients come in with just recordings they've made on their phones and they say, I want to make this into something that sounds professional. Well, one of the first things I will ask them to do is give me reference recordings, things that they have heard, things that they like, that they feel like might be appropriate for their particular song or style. Because at the very least, a lot of clients don't have the musical vocabulary to say to you, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z. But what they can do is say, I love the way this sounds. I don't know why, but I love the way this sounds, and I want my thing to sound a little bit like that. Then you as a producer are able to sit and listen and say, okay, we're talking about X, Y, Z, like the things that you are hearing in that recording, you'll know how to translate that as a producer because it is your job to know those things. On a larger level, I also think it's extremely important as a producer to remember that no matter how musical you are, and I am assuming that if you're a producer, you're deeply musical because it's all about being musical when you're a music producer.
Sure.
You have to remember that your job is to help the client with their song in their way. That's important. And if you are in service of the client and the client's vision, you can't go wrong. Even if you don't necessarily know what you're doing, it's going to lead you, meaning when you work with a client, it's going to lead you to ask the right kinds of questions to give the client what they want. And like I said, one of the first questions is, well, what's some music that you like that you think maybe your song would sound like? And maybe they're totally off base. but it's a starting point in the conversation. So as long as you remember that as a producer, you are in service to your client and your client's vision, you're going to do fine. Like my job as a producer is not to sound like the best version of me. It's to make the client's song sound like the best version of them.
Right. No, that's a great answer. That is very true. I've had to wear a lot of hats in learning that process myself, working with different styles and genres of people. I'm starting to learn my own sound as a producer. You know, after doing it for so many years, you kind of develop your own kind of way of doing things, but you're absolutely right. You know, every artist kind of has their own influences they draw from. And then at the end of the day, it's really about their vision coming into a reality. And it's great advice. I love it. As far as the perspective of how do you work with the client in terms of charging, you know, everybody kind of has their own. Some people, they'll just take a cut of the sales of the track. You know, some people might just charge hourly and they don't want anything to do with any other contracts whatsoever. Maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the different ways that you as a producer can monetize working with a client.
Well, it's evolved for me. When I started out, I had a very, very low hourly rate because I was new and I wasn't particularly fast at what I did. So for me, it was a low hourly rate, and that worked for two reasons. First of all, I don't believe in working for free. If you're working for a client, working for free gives the wrong message. It means that you don't value your own talent. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't work. It really, really doesn't work. Not only will you starve to death, but it gives the client the wrong message. So even if you're just starting out, charge something. As you begin to sort of become aware of the value that you are providing for your clients, and as your clients start to tell you how pleased they are with what you do, you can start to feel confident in raising your rates. One of the things that you will learn the more that you work in the studio is approximately how long certain kinds of things take. The more that you learn that, the less important it is for you to charge an hourly rate, and maybe the better it is for you to start working on what I do now, which is a project rate. So here's why I changed from hourly to project. Mm-hmm. I worked at this long enough to get very, very quick at what I did. So if you're charging hourly, but you're so good at something that you move really, really quickly, ultimately you're robbing yourself. So what occurred to me was, okay, I move quickly. And the reason I move quickly is not just to be fast. There's no being fast for fast's sake is not good. Yeah. But the more quickly you can work, the more musical I feel like things remain. You're not bogged down. You're not trying to figure out why a sound isn't happening, or if you once you let the technology sort of disappear because you're super familiar with it, you'll end up moving more quickly naturally. But moving quickly, at some point you start to hurt yourself as an hourly worker if you're very, very quick at doing something that other people maybe take a lot longer to do. I'll back up a little bit. In the short term, knowing how long things take is very helpful for you because you can give an accurate estimate to your potential client. They tell you what they want to do, and then you understanding how that will all go about can give them a ballpark plus or minus an hour generally as to what it will cost. And the hallmark of a professional studio producer is that they know their own process well enough to be able to speak confidently about the finances of a project. Mm-hmm. At a certain point, I realized, okay, I'm no longer interested in working hourly. I work for a project fee. That is the fee based on what I have negotiated with the client, what we're working on. Like, so I make it very clear what we're going to be working on, and then I give them a fee, half up front, half when we're done. Okay. Super simple. And I always, always, always talk about the money first. I don't hope that it's going to work out after we finish the project. Now, there's a tendency to want to do that because it's a little bit uncomfortable to talk about money. It's way, way more uncomfortable to have worked your butt off on a project, then present the client with a bill and have them say, that's too much, I can't pay that.
Yeah, that's not good. So, that's a sad day for everyone.
It is. Yeah. And I understand that talking about money is not comfortable. Mm-hmm. It's not why we got in this. We're in it for the music, but you have to do it. And you have to do it. And the more clear you can be and the more professional you can be about it, the easier that conversation will be, so that when you do get into the studio, all you're worried about is the music. Everybody's already signed off on the project and what it's going to cost and how that's going to be handled. And then you're good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree. And in my experience, I think an artist can tell if you are genuinely interested in offering them the best possible product. and as a producer. And I think when you charge what your time is worth and you actually genuinely show interest in their project, then it makes it more, for them, it's more motivating to actually pay you because they see this guy's going to do a good job. He's actually into what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And then I think it's less scary to talk about money if you can translate that to them, that I'm genuinely interested in working with you and I think I can help you and make it great. And I think when people sense that, they'll pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you set a deadline with your clients and do you do unlimited revisions? Because I know that you said you charge by a project base. At some point, you and I both have come to a place of where the person's like, well, let's try this and this and this. And sometimes it could just drag out super long. So how do you deal with that?
It has to do with setting expectations up front. So as far as deadlines are concerned, part of what I do with a particular project is schedule sessions. So my clients know when the sessions are going to happen, when they can expect their mix. And I give my clients, baked into that project fee, one remix session.
Okay.
So that I give them and I allow them to stream online the mix that I've provided for them. I don't give them the files yet.
Yeah.
I give them a week to live with the finished mix. And then at the end of that week, they are allowed to provide me a list of mix tweaks that they would like revised. In the project fee, in the little contract that I have them sign, I basically say, this entitles you to X, Y, Z, and one of those things is a mix and one remix session. And then I have a little asterisk, and underneath that I say, and any additional requests after that will be at an hourly rate of X.
Okay. Yeah.
So that they know that they don't have to get it exactly right the second time. It doesn't put that much pressure on them. But if they do want to continue to come back, it will be at an hourly rate. And it's amazing how much fewer revisions there are when people have to pay for their revisions. Because human nature is such that you will take advantage of whatever space is given to you. So I am polite, but I'm very clear about how much space the client is being given.
Yeah. So just to make sure that I'm understanding clearly, is you don't actually give them the file, you just let them stream it, like say on SoundCloud or private link or something like that. And
until they have paid for the second half of the project, I do not provide the file. It's just a clean set. And for most clients, and let me give you a little bit of inside information. If a client has a problem with that, that's probably going to be a problem, period. Any client who is a reasonable client who understands that this is a business transaction will completely understand that they are not entitled to their files until they have paid.
Yeah. So as far as the legal side goes, are there any royalty payouts that you include in your process of working with the client? I mean, obviously you came from like a law background starting out, so I'm sure this stuff has crossed your mind. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you how I approach it. I have a one sheet, that project quote that I was describing to you, where I talk about the fee and I talk about what they can expect. That's all written into a one sheet that we both sign.
Okay.
To your earlier point about taking a percentage of the project for maybe a lower fee, I have chosen in my work to work pretty much exclusively for hire.
Okay.
This is not a hard and fast rule, but for me, that has worked the best, where you hire me for a fee and then the project is yours. End of discussion. And I've just found that that's the simplest, best way. And I'm not then sort of liable to follow up and make sure that the project isn't generating income that I'm not aware of, that sort of thing. I just figure a higher upfront cost for the client, and then they know that that project is theirs. And that has worked for me in the past. So legally, I just have the one sheet where we sort of spell out what the project is going to cost, what the client can expect, what I will do for that fee, and any additional charges that might come if they decide to go beyond that. We both sign it, and that's the extent of it for me.
Okay. Yeah, I know that, a lot of people have different ways of doing things when it comes to royalty pays outs or whatever. I'm actually under the similar approach. I do the same thing. I don't really work for royalties. For me personally, it leaves a lot of open-ended, maybe I could have made more than, this song maybe wasn't as successful as I was expecting it to be or whatever, for whatever reason. Now, I know as I was browsing through your site, you work with a lot of songwriters, obviously, and they can send kind of their idea of like, say, 30 seconds of a song that they have. And then you actually contract other musicians and work with musicians to actually bring that idea to life in the way that that person kind of had in their head, and then submitting to them, which I think is really interesting. And maybe a producer has tons of extra songs on their hard drive, right? And they haven't been fully complete. And I know I've talked to other producers and had all these extra songs on their hard drive, and there's opportunities for them to sell them for maybe some kind of publisher out there. Have you had much experience with that at all? I'm just curious.
So there's a lot to unpack here. First of all,
Sure.
Let me describe a little bit of what a music publisher does. A music publisher either hires songwriters to work on staff, where the publishers take the publishing share of any song that the songwriter writes. The songwriter keeps the songwriter's share. But then it's the publisher's job to then figure out a way to exploit those copyrights, figure out places for those songs to be. So just because a song gets published doesn't mean you're making any money as a songwriter. As a matter of fact, all that really means is you've agreed to give up a portion of the ownership of that song. Now, as a songwriter who has, and let's refer to your example, lots of snippets of music on their hard drive and are looking for ways to monetize that, you, by definition, until you sign any sort of deal, by definition, if you've written a song, you are not only the songwriter, you are the publisher of your own material. You own the publishing on your own song. So that's a starting point. One of the things, especially in the world of electronic music and cues and things like that, I think one of the best places to look at that sort of thing and opportunities for those sorts of songs is for film and TV or music libraries. Mm-hmm. And these are places that are looking to quite literally buy songs, buy them in bulk for maybe not a lot of money, and you won't necessarily get a royalty stream on the back end, but you may be paid by a music library to give them 20 pieces of music that they can then place elsewhere. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I would look into is music libraries and the kinds of songs that they are looking for. Film and TV also. So a company that I really like, and I mentioned them earlier, is taxi.com.
Yeah.
And what Taxi does is it interfaces with the film and TV industry on behalf of songwriters, so that if you are a songwriter and you've got songs and the industry is looking for a certain thing, they will come to Taxi and say, here's what we're looking for. And Taxi goes to the songwriters and says, submit your stuff to us and we will listen to it because we're professionals and decide what we think is appropriate to send on to the industry. Because if the industry just opened their floodgates and let the songwriters send them stuff, they get so much stuff. Yeah. And a lot of stuff that wasn't really appropriate that it wouldn't work.
So the gatekeepers kind of in the middle. Yeah.
And Taxi has the relationships that songwriters don't. Sure. To go back to that earlier conversation around the network. Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that you can do as a songwriter with lots of songs on your hard drive is look into organizations like Taxi and see what they're looking for and listen to the examples they're posting. And if your stuff lines up with that, or you think that you can create stuff that lines up with that, that's a great place to start. But when it comes to publishing in particular, hold on to your own publishing unless there is a very, very compelling reason to give up your publishing. Mm-hmm.
No, that's really a good answer. Thank you. That was very insightful. And there's a lot of stuff to unpack that we've already talked about here today, I think, for a lot of people. I know that we are getting short on time. I really appreciate you coming out today. Where can more people stay connected with you? And, if somebody maybe wanted to work with you on some kind of collaboration of songwriting or whatever, how can people find out more about what you're doing?
Well, I will tell you this only because I don't want there to be any misunderstanding. Sure. While I will work with any client who hires me in the studio, my songwriting is something that over the years I've gotten to a place where I only work with artists that I have a relationship with. So sure. I'm not really looking for songwriting collaborators. Okay. I do, however, teach a lot of courses on songwriting and the music industry. Mm-hmm. And cliffgoldmacher.com is probably the best place to go find out about all that stuff.
Okay, awesome. And just for anybody who struggles with spelling, it's Cliff, CliffGoldmacher.com. So go check that out.
I should write that down. Thank you.
I was just happy I pronounced it correctly, to be honest with you. So yeah, I did it. So everybody go check out cliffgoldmacher.com. Check out his courses. It's a beautiful looking site. I loved it. Check out those courses. Thanks again, Cliff, for hanging out with us today. I appreciate your time. A lot of good info and insights that you shared with us today.
Thank you, Dan. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And enjoy that warm weather in California. And maybe I'll see you in Nashville sometime. It's not that far.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right, take it easy. This podcast is sponsored by liveproducersonline.com, a community of Ableton Live users connecting you to the pros to learn today's music production.